Hello everybody and welcome to an analysis of Game 8 of the World Chess Championship, Magnus Carlsen against Sergei Karjakin. So far we have seen 7 draws and now Carlsen again with the white pieces after Karjakin didn't really use those 2 white games he had in the round 6 and 7. The question was, would Carlsen be able to put some pressure onto his opponent as he was able in the rounds 3 and 4? And I would say we get right into it as usual, but well, beforehand I have to say this is the full analysis video. If you would like to see the highlight video where I just cover the highlights, the main points of the game, then please click on the link in the description. It will lead you right there, and it already tells you that something more has happened in this game than in the last 2 games where I didn't even make a highlight video. Alright, let's get started. Carlsen also has seen enough of e4 and Roy Lopez and Italian games. He plays d4 just like in the very first game, but doesn't go for a Trompovsky here. That's what he did in game 1, bishop g5, but he plays knight f3 and also avoids any theoretical discussions here. He goes 3e3 and is saying, I just want to achieve a normal position. And of course he has prepared this to a certain extent as well, but he will not go into any big theoretical battles in this game. c5 by Karjakin, playing in the center, b3, and bishop e7. The absolute main move here is knight c6, but well, bishop e7 also a very natural move, developing the bishop. Castle, bishop b2. Now Karjakin also aims to bring his bishop to the long diagonal. D takes c5, bishop takes c5, knight bd2, bishop b7, queen e2. Both sides play very natural moves and we get to this position, which is of course symmetrical, but white maybe has a tiny bit of pressure. Funnily enough, the same structure we just saw yesterday in the game when Karjakin was white but didn't really have anything out of the opening. Here though, white has a little bit of something. Queen e7. Now a3, obviously with the idea to go b4, and black stops this by going a5. Now knight d4, rook fd8, rook fd1. We see very natural moves from both sides here. Bring the rooks into the center, rook ac1. And now, well, black's just further improving his position. He's playing knight f8, aiming to bring the knight to g6, where on the one hand the knight is defending against any threats against the black king, as well as maybe it can be used in an attack against the white king as well. Now Carlsen played queen e1, and maybe, I was not sure here, at some point it seems he gets into a slightly more difficult position. Maybe knight c2 with the idea of going b4, of renewing this idea. And black probably should react with knight d5. And then something like g3 to control these squares. But honestly already, I would rather play with the black pieces here, even though it's equal. Well, maybe white can go e4 at a certain point, but it's a very rich position. We see not a lot of pieces have been exchanged, and even though it's symmetrical, there's a lot of potential here. Okay, I don't want to spend too much time here because we will get to much more interesting things later on. So queen e1, knight g6, bishop f1, that was his point, bring the bishop back to f1. But now knight g4, good move by Karjakin, and he's getting a little bit active here. Knight g4, and here indeed Carlsen is making an inaccuracy, to say the least. Well, maybe to say the least is too strong, but after knight b5 he's certainly worse. He should kick the knight out here from g4, going h3, knight e5, and now maybe move like queen c3 to have ideas along this diagonal, but black can play f6, and once again, it feels like to me the black position is already slightly easier to play, but it's all around equal. Okay, so what's the problem with knight b5? Well, Karjakin didn't exploit it. He played bishop c6, immediately questioning this knight on b5, but black could have continued his active play on the queen side, playing queen g5, and one threat is to go knight e5 and to enter on f3, or have these threats at least. For example, here if h3, well then obviously the knight comes back, and knight takes e5, knight takes e5. Now white is forced more or less to take with the bishop when he just has a worse position playing against the bishop pair, because otherwise, well, king h1 defends against this threat, but in fact black has another threat here, which is knight d3, and white cannot take because of the checkmate on g2. So some problems here. And instead here white could also go knight d4, which already indicates something has not gone to plan, because the knight just came from d4, and here black has something better, and to repeat moves can just play e5 when white needs to play h3. And also here e takes d4, h takes g4, now d3 is a nice move, and black will take on g4. Next move keeps the pressure, has nice bishops, and this is better for black. But Karjakin did not go for this. He played bishop c6 when once again the position is equal. a4, cementing knight on b5, bishop d5, bishop d4. Now we see massive exchanges in the center. Here, okay, Carlsen took with the rook on d4. He could have also taken on c8 first, which would have given him maybe a slightly better version, but this is pretty equal, and yeah, should lead to a draw. So Carlsen played rook d takes d4, rook takes c4. Now he did not take with the rook, which would be kind of the natural response, but he took with the pawn, and he's trying to imbalance the position. But he's also, well, creating a weakness here on a4. You can just imagine if a knight comes to c5, which we'll see shortly, this pawn on a4 is a weakness, and well, white has to see what he's going to do about it. So it shows though that Carlsen, he wanted to push, he wanted to still try something. He didn't just want to have another dull draw like the last two games. He wanted to get something here. Knight f6, queen d2, and black doesn't want to take on d4 here. White will take back with the e-pawn and improve his pawn structure, so rook b8, avoiding the trade and also protecting a pawn on b6 just in case. g3, knight e5, bishop g2, h6, just use some moves from both sides, improving their position. h6 to make some space for the king, and white has improved the bishop to a long diagonal in the meantime. f4, knight ed7, knight a7, now the knight is coming to c6, but on the other hand, we're seeing here that the pawn on a4 is doomed, will fall sooner or later, and the question is, in the meantime, will white create enough play with his pieces? Here, rook takes d7 would be possible, but not give white any edge. Queen c, no, excuse me, of course you take on e3 right away, and then pick up the pawn on c4 as well, and here this is just equal. Black has two pawns and the white king is open, so this is a draw. So Carlsen played h3 to improve his king position, but in the meantime he's losing this pawn on a4. He's hoping though with his active pieces to have enough counterplay, or enough, well, maybe create some chances. Rook d8 was played. Another interesting idea was to go e4 followed by e5, which is forcing the knight to h5 pretty much, creating also the threat of queen takes g3. And after queen f2, well, this is really a double-edged position, but if you have the assistance of the computer, and it all leads to draws here. g6, because white was threatening g4, so you give the knight some space. And then just to show a sample line here, queen h4, queen e3, and now queen takes h6, rook e8, defending against a checkmate. And here, well, both sides are so active that it will just always lead to a draw of some sort. Rook d8 is one variation. cute little repetition here. Just knight c6 back, and to defend against queen h8, black has to go back, and this is a perpetual. So just to show some lines here, this was possible with e4. The rook d8, well, position also remains pretty unclear. Karjakin played the natural move g6. You don't want to take and give the queen this check entering the black position. There was a better move though than g6, even though the difference is not that big. It was h5 with the idea to sometimes have h4, for example after e4, now take, and now knight e5, which in a position without h6 and e4 inserted would be quite annoying for black. But here you have this counterplay of h4, g takes h4 and queen e3 going after the f4 pawn, and black is better. Well, not easy to spot obviously, but I just want to point out real quick. So g6, queen d4, king g7, defending the knight on f6, and black's not too bothered by this pin. And here Carlsen played c5, and he's really going all in, it feels like. Also one has to say, or one has to point out that both players were below 3 or 4 minutes here, so they still had to make the time control, 6 moves to play, and this was incredibly tense obviously because, well, one slip and you could lose pretty much, or could end up in a very bad position. Indeed, c5 is this slip by Carlsen. This is not a good move, it's outright a blunder. A rook d7 had to be played, making use of this pin, and with his active pieces, white should be able to hold the balance. For example, knight c5, put the rook in a7, h5, knight e5, queen a2, and well, black has an extra pawn, but the white pieces are so active that black can't really make use of his extra pawn here, and the position is balanced. Things are different after c5 though, so what's going on anyway? Why c5? What is going on? Well, the queen can't take because then the knight is hanging on a4. And if the pawn takes, then there's queen d6, threatening rook, queen takes f8, and after rook takes d8, knight takes d8, the threat of queen e7 is pretty nasty, and black can't really stop that, and white is suddenly having a strong attack. And also there's the idea of knight takes e6 in position as well. But there is a hole in this line. Black takes on d8 first, and now takes with the knight on c5. And now after queen d6, with the same idea to bring the queen here, here black had a defensive resource to just keep everything together and remain a pawn up. But Karjakin missed it. Also low on time, he played queen d3 and giving white the chance to get back into a game. He needed to play queen a4. Same idea, bring the queen back to d7, queen e7 just doesn't do anything for white now, and black just is 2 pawns up and winning. So white would need to take the pawn on b6, but now you don't have any attack, just play knight cd7, play queen b5. I have this extra pawn obviously, and it's a strong one, it's a passed one, and this should just win in the long run, because also the white king is weak, since this pawn is on f4 instead of f2, and here black will win sooner or later. So huge missed opportunity for Karjakin, who plays queen d3, and what's the problem here? White has this cute little trick, which Carlsen of course spotted immediately. Knight takes e6, the knight cannot take because then the queen is hanging, and after f takes e6, now white wins back the piece and has counterplay against the suddenly weak black king. Okay, a4 played, the players reached time control, but now e4, of course, cutting or interfering on this diagonal, threatening queen takes g6, his pawn cannot be protected. The black queen is coming back to defend the king, queen g7, queen e8 check, queen f8, Now Carlsen played queen c6. Queen g6 was also possible, and black doesn't have to repeat moves here. You can also try king h8, and might as well be that Karjakin would have played this. But it turns out in all these positions it kind of balances each other out, the strong pawn on the a file and the weak black king. So here, for example, a3, a queen has to hurry back to stop this pawn. Now queen e8 covering g6, queen takes b6, a2, queen a7, queen is stopping the pawn once again. Black is able to queen now, but then we have the other issue again. The king is too weak and white has a perpetual draw. Just a sample line. So queen g6 was also possible, but nothing wrong with queen c6, threatening the pawn on b6. So black plays queen d8. Now f5, white is trying to open up the black king further, but black can just ignore this for now, go a3. F takes e6, and now king g6, king g7, not a2, that would run into e7. So there's a lot to be calculated, but here, yeah, white gives this check and picks up the pawn, and in fact will be a pawn up, so this is not a good line for black. So Karjakin played king g7 to exactly prevent this plan, but Carlsen went e7 anyway, which is fine, but queen b5 would have been maybe finer, or more comfortable way to play at least. Queen b5, now a2 would run to queen b2 check, and if knight takes e6, now queen b4 just going after this pawn. And also queen a8 doesn't work because of queen e7 check, picking up the knight, and at least having a perpetual, probably having a perpetual. At least, who knows, maybe more. So black should play queen f8 here. By the way, this didn't happen in the game, it's just a variation. Queen takes b6, and now here black has still the strong pawn a3, but yeah, for example, here white can give this pawn to free his bishop, bishop comes to d5, and this position is a draw. Okay, so Carlsen played e7, queen takes b6, and here many people expected Karjakin to just take the pawn on e4, and it's an immediate draw after bishop takes e4, queen takes e4, queen a7 check, queen takes a3, and black gives a perpetual. But Karjakin did not want to make a draw yet. He played knight d3, rightly so, recognizing that even though he's a pawn down, he's not risking anything here, because this strong pawn on a3 will always keep white busy. And here Carlsen played an inaccuracy, which makes his position quite uncomfortable again. Played queen a5. There are many alternatives, for example h4 and bishop h3 to activate the bishop, but probably the most human way would have been to go e5, or well, let's not say human, the most practical way, to just give this pawn up, but at least free the bishop, so the bishop can come to d5. For example, queen d4, king f8, bishop d5, and once you have this bishop on d5, stopping the pawn, coming to a2, you really don't have to worry that much anymore as white, and this should lead to a draw. So queen a5 played, and what's the problem here? Well, black can, with tempo, improve his position considerably. The move queen c5 is quite strong. The queen trade is out of question for white because he can't stop the pawn from promoting. So queen has to move, goes to a6, and now black plays knight e5, and this is just a powerful setup here. The knight blocking the pawn on e4, the bishop is kind of dead now on g2, not participating, not stopping the pawn on a3, and the queen and the knight, they're just working together beautifully here, taking a lot of squares away from the white queen. And this position is still uncomfortable because black has ideas to somehow get this pawn to a1 or maybe come close with the king. Many ideas and not easy to play, and in fact Carlsen goes wrong here. He plays the move queen e6, and that is a blunder, which leads to a losing position for him once again for a second time in this game. The way to go was to play, well, either queen b7 or h4. h4 makes more sense to me. And the point is here that, well, the black king can come closer, but once the king comes to d6, you just play a move here like king h3. Yeah, this is not trivial. This is, of course, found with the help of the computer here. But the point is that now, of course, a2 runs into queen a6, and whenever there's knight moves, you can probably just go e5 to free this bishop, and after h5 you can play bishop f1, and white will hold. But yeah, not an easy task to begin with. And Carlsen goes queen e6, but this is bad. And Karjakin finds the only winning continuation here, which is h5. And we'll see in a moment why this is winning. Carlsen played now h4, which makes it fairly easy for his opponent. Queen a6 back would have definitely been a more serious try. And now we'll see also why h5 is useful. And I just want to show this variation, which is easy to find with the computer, but over the board would have been quite a challenge even for Karjakin. So let's see. So h5, here we see an advantage. The king can hide on h6, the knight can come to g6. Another advantage is that black can open up the white king and use that for checks. G takes h4, queen takes e5, king g1. This is one forced line at which end black wins. a2 here, now bishop e4, now queen d4 check, king f3, and now queen g1 just works out beautifully for black. It's just incredible. I mean, you would need to find this as black, not easy. Threatening a1 queen, queen takes a2, runs into knight takes h4 check, king f4 is made on g5, and king e2, queen h2 check picks up the queen. And well, that's all. If you cannot take the pawn on a2, then there's nothing else you can do either, and black is winning. So let's see what happened in the game. In fact, here Karjakin just played one more move, and then the game was concluded. So for those of you who haven't seen the game yet, if you want to, you can try to find this final move after which Carlsen resigned right now here yourself. So stop the video if you would like to and see if you can find it. Alright, let's have a look. a2 just wins. a2 and Carlsen resigned. Why did he resign? Well, of course he would like to take, otherwise this pawn is queening, and queen a6, queen d4 doesn't change anything. But the problem is that here black suddenly has a mating attack out of nothing, really, surprising at least. King h1, queen c1 check is made the next move, and king h3, the queen just coming to g1, and believe it or not, the king is so open, but the queen is covering a7, so the only check in the position is queen b2, and then the king just calmly moves one forward. Now the queen is covering b6, the pawn on e4 is not allowing white to give the check with the bishop, and all the other checks on f6 or g7 we don't have to look at, obviously, and there's no way to defend this checkmate sensibly. If you play bishop f3, you have to defend against this checkmate, but there's still knight f2, you have to give up your queen, and that's it. Incredible finish. I mean, really nice geometry here at the end, and the way it works out for black just beautifully. And this is the first decisive game in this match. Karjakin wins and now leads after 8 games, only 4 more games to play. Now he is the favorite to win this match after all. He has been very solid. Only 2 more white games for Carlsen. Also psychologically very difficult now. Losing a game with white for the first time, Carlsen is behind in the match, and this game he just took way too many risks. It started with b takes c4, which already, well, you can do that, but you don't have to, and then c5 was also way over the top, and in the end game, well, difficult, but yeah, Carlsen just not in shape in this game, making so many mistakes. And Karjakin, you also have to give him credit to keep fighting and play knight d3 in the end, not going for the draw, but keep fighting and then finding this final variation. Well done by the challenger. Alright, so now we will await 4 exciting games. This is just intense now, and the question will be, can Carlsen come back from this? Okay, I hope you enjoyed this analysis, and I'll see you again very soon. Goodbye.